So I realized I've been using the tagline most explosive podcast in Kingston, Ontario, and I've yet to actually feature a guest from Kingston. That changes on this episode where I catch up with longtime friend Maggie Maple. Maggie has been a staple in the Kingston restaurant scene for some time and is a bit of a globetrotter. Today I'll pick her brain about her upbringing and family, time spent working in the kitchen industry and being at the same job for 8 years, and some of her favorite travel stories and advice to new travelers such as myself. Just in time for spring, let's fly away together on this relaxing and fun episode of The Bum with AUZZY Napalm. Welcome back to The Bomb with AUZZY Napalm, the most explosive podcast in Kingston, Ontario. And everyone, today I am joined with Maggie Maple. Maggie, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
So, as the interview got closer, I realized I would be regretful if I did the original interview that I planned. Originally, I planned to do a sort of travel-centric episode because I've never traveled and you've done quite a bit, but I realized it would not only be a disservice to you and to the listeners, but to myself to reduce you to just a traveler, because that's part of who you are, but it's not who you are. So I actually woke up early this morning and rewrote a bunch of the interview. So traveling is still going to be part of it.
No way. All right.
So one of the main reasons that I did change it is when I met you and your brother years ago, you two always fascinated me as just not only being people who always had smiles on their faces, but just wonderful storytellers. So I want to know where all of that started. Can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing?
Totally. It's so funny that you asked that because my dad is a major storyteller.
Okay.
Major storyteller. And my mom is also a storyteller, but more of like the written word, right? She doesn't, I wouldn't say she doesn't like recite stories or tell us stories so much, like, or the same way my dad did maybe, but he would always tell us stories where we would recite poems like The Highwayman and The Cremation of Sam McGee. Those are like some of his favorites.
Okay.
And he would always tell me stories of history, but as if they were a story. He'd be like, oh, so there was this guy Napoleon, right? And he was emperor and he actually crowned himself. And like, I'd be like, whoa. And then I grew up and I was like, oh, these weren't stories. Like,
right.
These were real things, right? And so I think that's a big part of it, at least for me. I'm also like the perfect introvert extrovert. I think I got that from my mom, my dad. My dad's a total extrovert. My mom's a classic introvert. And I think my brothers are kind of like that too. You know, my brother Matto, obviously, he's your best buddy. But we also have a brother, Casey. So I have a brother who's 3 years older and a brother who's 3 years younger. And Casey is a huge storyteller. Matto, not so much. When you get him going, he'll give you some gems, right? But he's not so quick to just say it like maybe Casey and I are. So I think like that's kind of a big influence for sure. It's just my parents being storytellers. I watched a little mini interview with Brad Pitt one time, and he said that as producers, you're the stewards of the stories.
Oh, I like that a lot.
And I really liked that. And that really resonated with me. And like drawn it home on my mom's side a little bit is that, you know, my mom's Native, she's Algonquin, and in Native culture, you tell stories, right? You don't write a lot of stuff down. And so I think that maybe that's also kind of just a way of keeping a little bit of that culture alive, you know? Every time I'm teaching someone at work, I always say, let me tell you a story. And then all my colleagues are like, oh God, here we go, you know? But it just kind of helps bring it to real life. So I think that's such a nice thing that you said about just me being a good storyteller. You feel like you get that vibe from my family because like, that is so touching.
Well, it's true. And since I met you, again, one of the things that sticks out is a story your brother told me about how your dad wanted him to drink out of his skull or something like that. Something really Viking. And just, you know, since then, you know, they always stick with me when you tell them. And so what is your dad's heritage exactly? You mentioned your mother's Algonquin.
So it's funny you say that about the skull and the Viking thing because my dad's first generation Canadian.
Right.
And my grandparents are from Norway and Denmark.
Oh, okay.
And they immigrated, I think my mom said they immigrated in 1927. And they moved to Montreal and they met on the train from Halifax to Montreal.
Oh.
Fell in love, had 10 kids. My dad's number 9 out of 10.
10 kids.
Yes. Isn't that crazy?
That is.
So he's in his 60s now, mom's in her 50s. And it's time for us to be stewards of the stories once more, I guess. So I think that was really cool, like just kind of growing up with those two influences. My mom always says, she says, oh, my kids, their ancestors were the first and second people in Canada.
That's amazing.
Which I always think is pretty cool.
And so your heritage must play a big part in who you are today.
I think so. I think just me personally, I've always felt a little bit more connected with my Scandinavian root.
Okay.
But I think my brothers feel a little more connected with their Algonquin roots. That doesn't mean that one part is favored of your background or anything. But I think one of the really cool things about being Canadian is everybody's from somewhere else.
Right. We're a big melting pot, as they say.
I love that. I love when you meet someone, you say, where are your ancestors from? And the answer I get all the time when I ask somebody that is, oh, Canada, right? Which basically means you've been here forever. You're not really sure, but you meet a lot of people who are first generation Canadian, second generation Canadian.
Yeah, it's true.
It's great.
Well, I noticed too, a lot of people our age in, the millennial, as they describe it, a lot of us are either first or second generation Canadians because either our parents or grandparents were the ones who came over. And I find it such a difficult question when people ask, oh, what nationality are you or what heritage are you? It's like, well, it's such a mixing pot in myself. Like it's such a hard question to answer.
Yeah, totally.
And I also find it interesting you say you're more attached to the Scandinavian roots because this part of Ontario we live in specifically too is so heavily, heavy with the proud Native culture, and Native culture is such a big thing around us. Totally. So it's interesting to hear that.
Well, it's funny, if you go out west, have you ever been in Western Canada much at all? Or
I actually haven't. I've gone out east, but not west.
Yeah, it's crazy. We're so lucky. We have such a beautiful country and not enough people travel within Canada.
It's true.
And out west, the Native influence there is insane. You go to the mall, there's a huge totem pole. You go to Vancouver Airport, there's beautiful Haida art all over the place. It's cool that you think that we have so much influence because when you compare it to the West, it's not at all.
Right.
It's really interesting. And then in the East, same thing. You don't see much at all either. It's really interesting to see how that kind of goes.
I guess living where I've lived as long as I have, growing up in Belleville and going to school there, 60% of my high school's population was Native coming in from Tyendinaga, right? So
that's cool.
For me personally, it's always been something in my life, many friends.
Yeah.
So you also mentioned your family quite a bit. How important is your family to who you are?
Oh, super important. Love these guys. They're the tribe, As I mentioned, I have one brother's 3 years older, one brother's 3 years younger. They're both two totally different people, totally awesome. And growing up in the 90s with two brothers, that makes a woman, And I always say my older brother, he has blonde hair and blue eyes.
Really Scandinavian looking then.
Exactly. Takes after my father for sure. My little brother, Mattawa, black hair, black eyes.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And then I'm kind of in the middle, right? This is my natural hair color. It's always been brown, And so it's funny because Casey, my older brother, he's white chocolate. My little brother, Mattawa's dark chocolate. And I'm milk chocolate. Right in the middle.
Well, and you and Mattawa, you're not identical, but you look very similar. You can tell you're related.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not familiar with Casey. If you and Casey stood side by side, would I be able to tell you're related?
I think so. And I'm very freckly and my brothers aren't very freckly.
Sure.
But we have the same shape of face and we certainly carry ourselves the same way. So you'd probably notice it from mannerisms. So I think you would probably see it from that. But yeah, people think my little brother and I are twins all the time. And if I'm 3 years older, I'm oh, I still got it. And then my parents are great. They're both, my dad is a firefighter.
Okay.
He's worked in a Toronto City Fire Department for years, used to be Scarborough before the mega city. And then my mom is a retired midwife.
Oh, awesome.
So they both had two really crazy, unique, difficult jobs that require a lot of sacrifice. And neither of my parents is afraid of hard work. And we have a really big culture in my family of working hard and constant progression and trying to be a better person is a big part of the philosophy in our kind of family unit.
Now, midwife and firefighter, those are two jobs that are kind of you can't make up the hours. How did that affect the family situation with both of them having such...
Good question.
It's not a 9 to 5, especially being a midwife and a firefighter. You're on call. So how did that affect the parenting?
I always ask people this, and the two memories I can provide. Firefighter wasn't so bad. I mean, lots of people work shift work, right? Mm-hmm. But midwife, like we're all hanging out, and all of a sudden, mom's got to go because the baby's coming. That kind of sucks sometimes. The two examples I can use is Star Wars Episode 3. It's going down. My mom, my brother and I were all sitting in the movies. We got the drinks and the popcorn, and we never bought food at the movies because it's so expensive.
Oh, yeah.
The drinks and the popcorn. We're sitting down, credits roll. Mom gets a page. We got to go.
Wow.
Right. Like, can you feel that story? Like,
yep.
Another example is when I was a teenager. It sounds so petty, but when I was a teenager, I could rarely borrow the car.
Sure. Yep.
Right. Mom gets a page, she needs to go. Or sometimes mom would do an agreement with me where like I had a cell phone, which wasn't really a big deal. It was a big deal when we were teenagers. Not a lot of people had a cell phone. And I had a cell phone, so my mom would call me and she'd say, okay, you got to come home right now. Baby's coming. And I'd have to get home, right now. You can't wait or anything. So that was a little bit of a drag, but you get through it. Like, I don't think my parents were ever people who were going to be happy or content working like 9 to 5s, at least when they were younger. Probably now they'd be cool with it.
Well, and it's amazing that I'm getting all this out of you because it's really starting to paint the picture of, we're going to get into it later, but how you ended up in the kitchen industry, first of all, such a hectic schedule, but also those are such selfless gigs that your parents did as well. It kind of explains why you and your kin are such positive people.
Thank you.
Why did your mom retire? Just age, or just didn't want to do it anymore?
Basically, that was it. Oh no, she loved midwifery. I think she'd do that till the day she died if she could.
Most midwives do, right?
Yeah, right. But I think she was just, you want someone calling you at 2 a.m. when it's -20 when you're 50 years old? You probably don't.
No, probably not.
So I think that the job was just becoming more demanding than she was able to give at that point in her life. Her kids were grown up and that's maybe she can move to a kind of a different gig. And now she works a 9 to 5 and she loves it. So not disparaging 9 to 5s, by the way, just throwing that out there.
Different strokes for different folks,
absolutely. Right? Yeah, absolutely.
Now, before we kind of move on to later in life, you shared a post the other day that I just kind of wanted to touch on, that you and Matt were extras in John Q.
Yes.
And for people listening, that's an older Denzel Washington movie. I was wondering if there's any other unique experiences like that you got to have that is unique to your childhood, not necessarily being a movie extra, but just something unique and special that you personally got to experience, because that's such a cool thing.
Oh man, I don't even know. That's such a heavy duty question. That was definitely a really, really cool thing to do as a kid.
Well, let's just touch on that quick. How did you even end up doing that?
Well, I think it was like a friend of my mom's. Through like word of mouth, her kids were doing it and they just needed like a bunch of local kids kind of a thing.
And where were you living at the time?
We were living in Bowmanville, which is kind of like 45 minutes outside the GTA, not yet in Kingston. And so I think it was filmed in like Sarnia or something like that. So we were just like kids on the set who would like be at the school when he was dropping off his kid, and like you can't see us or anything, right?
No.
Well, yeah, that was a really cool experience. And I remember my mom said, well, you have to call him Mr. Washington if you see him. My family's very old fashioned. My mom, my dad, they love that stuff. But I remember I asked Mattawa about it. I said, I just watched John Q. Did you remember much about it? And he goes, well, I don't remember much. He would have been 8 years old, maybe. He was a little kid, right?
Right, yeah.
And he said, I remember that there was all these pops and like chips and stuff around. And then finally you and I were like, well, can we eat these chips or what? And we asked somebody and they were like, oh yeah, it's for everyone. And all the extras like flooded in to start getting pops and chips because like nobody wanted to ask. And my brother was like, I really want this Pepsi. Like,
he was the guy finally brave enough to ask for everyone.
Oh, I know, right? Little kid. I was like, you got to do it, bro. You got to go. But I would say one small thing that I really thought was kind of cool is I don't know if you know Chef Michael Smith.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
a chef from PEI. I actually got to work on a like booze cruise that was catered by all of these Prince Edward Island chefs, and he was one of them. And I did that when I was maybe like 20 and just hung out with all these like rich Prince Edward Islanders. And that was so fun. And I threw it on my resume because why not? Yeah, he like does some work with like Sodexo at Queens here.
Really?
And so he's like often in Kingston. And he's like the nicest guy of all time, like total gummy bear and a really super talented chef. So that was a really cool experience for me to be able to kind of have that little stage there for the night. Like,
well, and that kind of goes perfectly into the next part. You're one of the few people I've known who's worked the same job for many, many years, but also you love it and truly excel at what you do.
Thank you.
So you mentioned that you were on that booze cruise when you were 20, but how did you land into the kitchen industry, first of all?
Okay, very good question. My first ever restaurant job was Swiss Chalet.
Really?
Swiss Chalet on Bath Road near the Frontenac Mall. It's not the same location now. But yeah, basically my friend, I was 17, my friend in high school, she worked as a hostess there. She said, I could probably get you a job. I said, okay, great. I was working as a cashier at a grocery store, just kind of wanted something different. And so she got me a part-time job at Swiss Chalet. And I was good at it. I was just good at it, And I remember my boss all the time, she would say, oh, Maggie, you just find me 5 more of you and I'll be set. What a nice thing to say, right?
That's such a compliment, yeah.
And so it's such a nice thing to say. And I kind of just like finished high school and I was just working at Swiss Chalet and I wanted to take a year off. I always knew that. I just needed something different. For 14 years, you're doing the same thing every day. And I'm a big supporter of people taking a year off. Didn't take me long before I was like, well, I better go to college. And so I knew I didn't really want to go away to school or anything. So I thought, I'll check out St. Lawrence and see what kind of program St. Lawrence had. And they had this hotel and restaurant management program. And I was kind of good at the restaurant business. I thought, I'd like to learn a little more about this. Why not? And as a small tangent, I never condone not going to school because you don't think it's going to make you any money. People are like, oh, I don't want to study history. It's not going to make me any money. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Right? Learning and money, they don't go together. It's a whole different thing, right? So I wasn't discouraged about, oh, maybe I might not make money from this industry, which is a foolish thought, but people will tell you that. I wanted to learn more about it. So I went to St. Lawrence and I got good grades. And I actually graduated in 2010. I was the valedictorian.
Wow, awesome.
And they had a special lunch for like my mom. And, it was so nice. And I did well in school and I just liked it. And, I was good at it. And I got really lucky. Some people don't find out what they're good at until they're 60 years old. I happened to be 17 and I just kind of fell backwards into the hospitality industry and I liked it and I love it. I made my career out of this. This is my field. And now I'm so lucky where I'm in a position where I get to lead the new people who are coming into this industry, share with them what I know. And I'm learning new things from my colleagues every day about how to be a better server or a better leader. It's a business where you can never know it all. And it's a business where you work with some of the coolest people you're ever going to meet. Yeah, so I know it's probably a bit of a ramble, but for those who haven't worked in hospitality, you really don't know people. You see a completely different side of people when you work in hospitality. Sometimes I want to say to someone, like, people feel like they can talk to you sometimes in a mean way because you're like the help. And sometimes I want to just like, if I replayed you the way you just spoke to me in any other environment, you would be appalled at your behavior, right? But for some reason, to the help, it's okay. So sometimes you see a bad side of people, but more often you see the most generous side of people, especially like with all the lockdown and the corona that just happened. Our locals have been dynamite in supporting the Kingston restaurant scene. Everyone's so helpful. People are tipping more. They know times are tough. Like, it's been really, really refreshing.
The tipping more is actually really awesome to hear because that's always one of the things I've been wondering since all this started is how is that side of the industry getting affected? So it's good to hear that from what you've been seeing that
Totally. I think so. People are more generous overall for sure. They know it's been a tough year for everybody, right? And unfortunately, the hospitality industry got really, I don't want to say targeted, but it certainly feels like that sometimes. I get it. We're a place where people gather. It's COVID. This is a disease that is spread through gatherings, but it just kind of feels like that lack, maybe the people who are making the policies haven't worked in restaurants a whole lot.
I do want to unpack how you answered getting into the industry in two parts, because I really do love what you said about you don't take something that you love to make the money in school.
Yes. I
went to school for theater. I still am paying off my student debts to this day. It's because I loved it. I didn't think I'm going to go be famous. I want to take something in post-secondary. This is what I know and what I love. And taking it, I've mentioned a few times on the podcast, it sort of killed the passion for me. But at least I went and tried and found out.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's kind of interesting that you said that, because I think that's one thing that you see a lot that happens in hospitality is people burn out. And I think one of the reasons why, same kind of reason why people burn out in healthcare, I think, is you spend your whole time caring about someone else's experience. And there's not a lot of people caring about your experience, right? So that's why we as the leaders in the restaurant business, we have to make sure that we're really taking care of our people, checking in with them, making sure everybody's okay. And you'll see a lot of people just kind of fizzle out because they feel underappreciated, or they fall out of love, with the job. And that's really unfortunate, because cooking is such a big part, or should be a big part of everybody's life, because there's so much joy that can come from sharing a delicious and nutritious meal with people. And it's sad because people end up having bad sentiments about the kitchen. And there's probably way more times that you had good memories, right? But that's the part that kind of people get tired, But yeah, no, I think for the most part, people are generous, especially lately. I've had a lot of guests say, oh, round for the kitchen. And right, okay, we had a couple beers for whoever's working in the kitchen. The kitchen gets to have a quick beer at the end of the work, that kind of thing. So that's a really popular thing that you see as well, But yes, I think one thing that sucks is we were kind of talking about earlier, because as a back of house employee, most of your income comes from the business. And restaurants are they're tough businesses to run. Your bottom line isn't always what you want it to be. So it means you can't always pay your people what you want. And I think that's the case for most people. I don't believe it's a case of most people are greedy restaurant owners, But yeah, you work long hours in really hot conditions, tough conditions. And I was talking to one of my colleagues about this, breaks aren't really a big part of the restaurant culture. We need you. It's going to be busy from 5 until 10 o'clock. It's hard to send someone out for their half an hour paid break during that time. So that's another reason why that can be kind of a stressful job.
You've been at the same restaurant for 5-6 years now?
Oh, this is we're going on 8 this fall.
8,
so
wow,
7.5.
Way off. And so you're the big boss of the front of house, correct?
So we have 4 managers in the front of house. Mm-hmm. And everyone does kind of their own unique role, I would say, just like you'll see with kitchen managers and sous chefs.
Right.
And all of our front of house managers happen to be women. They're all awesome, strong leaders. And I tell my colleagues all the time, not even just my colleagues in the leadership team, everybody, I say, you being good at your job makes it so easy for me to be good at my job. Right. So thank you. And I don't really like to use the word management. These people don't need to be managed. They are very intelligent, self-sufficient. Every single person who works for the business believes in the Tango brand, believes in the passion of hospitality and service that we try to provide there. And they don't need a helicopter manager. They do need a leader. I need a leader. Everybody needs a leader, And that's, I think, the way we try to look at it a little bit more is doors always open, come anytime. It's a really wonderful place to work. Everyone is very kind and generous and helpful to one another. And we always say it's the family, right? I spend probably more time with these guys than I do with my own family, and we're all in each other's business all the time. And it's hilarious. And the family that, works together, we party together, everybody keeps an eye out for each other. And always the best thing that I always list about my job is that the people are amazing. It's very, very important to work with a good crew.
Have you noticed as well many coworkers with as many years in as yourself?
Absolutely. Totally. Our staff turnover is not very high at Tango. And that is something that's a little opposite to industry trends. In hospitality, and in tourism, staff turns over a lot.
For people listening to, I believe the statistic is 35 to 45% turnover rate in kitchens.
I believe that, right? Mm-hmm. Staff turns over a lot. I am not the oldest staff member at Tango.
No way.
There's a handful of people who have worked there longer than I. Tango opened in July 2013. I started working October 2013. So I was not part of the initial launch. There's still a whole bunch of crew that are from the initial launch.
That's amazing and very unheard of nowadays in the industry.
Definitely. And yeah, people, I think, it's a very nice place to work where your creativity and your opinion are respected and fostered. And I think that that's something that you don't get everywhere. And one of the things I say to my boss all the time is I say, it's very important for me to work at a place where my opinion is valued and respected. And I get that in spades at Tango. So,
and the other cool thing you mentioned is that the other 3 front of house managers are all women as well.
They are.
One of the things I have written down is that the industry is very much a boys' club for men, not as much as it used to be, but it's still there. Has that, I guess it hasn't, but I was going to ask, has it really affected or given you any struggles to get to where you are today?
I don't think so. I think it's harder in the kitchen. You see a lot less women in kitchens. You see a lot more women in kitchens now. I love it. A balance in both is great for everybody. You know what I mean? I don't want to just see men in the kitchen and women in the front of house. That doesn't make any sense to me, or vice versa. I think personally, I don't have much of an experience with, hospitality being a boys' club necessarily. I also have quite a strong assertive personality and I grew up with 2 brothers. I don't know if that's ever played into my personal experiences, but even when I was in college, my 2 professors, my 2 main professors, my program coordinators, they were both men. And they were very helpful to women in the industry, very helpful to everyone, but I never felt like there was any discrimination, shall we say. However, in my cooking class, our sous chef, who would help out chef, get everything ready for the class, that kind of thing. She had been a chef in the industry for years. And one time our chef was talking to her and he said, "Oh, how was it for you coming up as a woman in the kitchens?" And she said, "Oh, even at school, when she was going to culinary school, all the time, maybe chef would come up and give her like a little pinch or something, or scrutinize her work, but maybe not scrutinize everybody else's, But I think that that's, we've progressed as a society, at least in my personal opinion. I don't feel like I've had much interaction with that kind of bad behavior in hospitality.
I'm happy to hear it because it, like you said, back of house, it exists still and it is discouraging. Again, it's nice to hear that it hasn't affected you in your travels so far.
And I hope, if you were to ask someone 10 years younger than me who's working in this industry, I would hope it would be the same answer.
Now, your love for food is very noticeable. You're not just someone who's memorizing a script. Is that something that came with your years in the industry, or is that something that you've always had?
I think so. I hope this doesn't hurt my parents' feelings, but I really don't feel like there was a huge culture around food growing up in my household. My parents got divorced when I was young. My mom was a single mom with 3 kids going to university. She was just trying to feed us and shut us up, probably, whatever you'll eat. Great. Right. So I don't feel like there was necessarily a huge culture around food. And in fact, I remember I was quite a novice, even in my culinary explorations, even going into college. I was probably 18 the first time I tried sushi. This is also a different time. But yeah, I was not a very adventurous eater. And then as I learned more, the adventure came with that. And I think a lot of it came through traveling. when I was traveling, I am a big eater when I travel. And I try a little bit of everything, right? And I think that helped me kind of broaden my palate as well, because, when you're on a shoestring budget in your backpack and you're going to eat whatever's free, and sometimes the free isn't always something you would normally pick for yourself. I went to Turkey, I started liking hard-boiled eggs. Who knew?
Well, and I'm glad you led the conversation this way, because it naturally went into, again, kind of what I was basing the original interview off of. Is you've traveled so much, but it's for, again, someone our age, you've done it on your own dime. It's not been, and again, this isn't me harking on people who do it this way, like, to each their own, but you didn't do it on someone else's dollar. Your parents weren't paying for you to travel. So the reason I think that's important is you not only travel quite a bit, but you must appreciate the traveling that much more and put that much more thought into where you're going.
Certainly. Like I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier when we were speaking, my family didn't have a lot of money growing up. And I grew up in the 90s, and, the internet was kind of becoming a thing, but wasn't really in people's houses yet. And I knew travel was expensive. And I just kind of thought that was going to be something that wasn't really available to me, growing up. My mom did a lot of good work. We traveled a lot around Ontario. We went a lot out east, PEI for family vacations in the summer, a couple of weeks, but I'd never really been anywhere like internationally.
Right. And that's the boat I'm in, where my parents, we weren't well off either. Two brothers. We've traveled a lot in Ontario, and we went out east to Newfoundland, but I personally never left Canada. So again, to see someone from a similar upbringing, that's why I want to tear your ear on this one.
No, and I'm kind of really happy you actually asked that question, because piggybacking off the thought of that was something that was just really never going to be available to me. I kind of, as I got older, put my mind to the fact that maybe I should start to work to make it available to me. One of the hardest things I ever had to do, and this sounds so stupid, but sit in my travel and tourism class in college. I'm 19. I'm so excited. Travel and tourism class. This is going to be great, And she didn't mean anything by this, but the teacher, she wants to kind of get a vibe for the class. And she says, "Oh, who's ever been to Europe?" And a bunch of people put up their hands. Who's ever been to the Caribbean? A bunch of people put up their hands. And I didn't put my hand up for one fucking question. And I just remember that feeling of man, I'm so uncultured and unlearned, and how depressing is this? You're almost 20 and good for you. You've been to Quebec, which also good for you. A lot of people don't go anywhere at all.
I love Quebec.
I love Quebec. La belle province. I love it. It's one of the best places. And let me tell you this, for those of you who are hesitant about your Quebec travel, little bit of French goes a long way, right? That's all I'll say. Everyone loves to feel respected. But yeah, then I was just, after that class, I was like, that's it. I'm doing it, and the internet helps a lot. When we were kids, our parents would have to go to a travel agency and say, "Oh, hey, I want to book a trip somewhere." And you'd have to talk, and the travel agent takes their fee, and they're paid to tell you to go here and there and to stay at this hotel. And it just didn't feel like authentic travel. And I bet you it probably didn't feel like authentic travel to a lot of people. And that's why the internet really helped. And the new advancement is, of course, Airbnb, right? That's a crazy thing for travel and tourism. But I started looking up shoestring travel. I got a couple of Lonely Planet books, and I was going to go to Europe when I graduated college. That was it. I was going to go to Europe, and I was going to backpack, and it was going to be awesome. And I did for 8 months. And I came home with a busted ankle. I go hard. But yeah, that was great. And that was the first out of many trips. And I've done a lot of traveling solo, which I highly recommend for any single person who is interested in traveling, especially women. Solo travel is really, really important. And it forces you. if you and I went on a trip to Montreal, we'd go and we'd sit down, we'd sit at the bar and we'd try some food and we'd be like, oh, this is great. We probably wouldn't talk to too many other people because we have each other, right? But if you go to Montreal and you sit down at the bar by yourself, you're kind of like, you want to share this with somebody and look at all these people who are here. Solo travel is really, really important. Don't be afraid.
Now, and that was the first place you visited is Europe and did the backpacking?
Yes.
Where'd you hit in that?
I did. So they have this weird thing in Europe. It's probably very convenient for the Europeans, but they have like open border travel.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So if you're an EU citizen, you can go anywhere. It's no problem. If you're not an EU citizen, you kind of have to play the game a little bit. So there is this area, not every European country is part of it. I think it's called Schengen. I don't know how you pronounce it. Anyways, it was this accord that allowed for the free movement. You as a Canadian can have 3 months out of a 6-month period there without a visa.
Oh, okay.
So what I did was I just kind of played around the countries that weren't part of that agreement. Maybe countries that weren't necessarily on my radar to begin with, but because they weren't part of this agreement, I had to kind of bounce in and out of these countries in my travels to make it work. So I landed in Paris and I started my ticker. But then I went to Ireland for a month, right? And I spent a month in Ireland, and man, the Emerald Isle is something else. It is beautiful there. And then I did some time in France and some time in Italy and some time in Turkey and the Netherlands. And it was just great.
And that's got to be awesome going from not traveling to hitting so many classic spots. And like you said, ones you weren't even expecting to go to.
Totally. Like I remember this very real feeling of like being like looking at the Colosseum, and the Colosseum in Rome is just this massive, massive thing. And there's a highway just right around it, and here's all these Romans and they're just walking around like, oh, this ain't no thing. And I'm like, you realize this is the Colosseum, right? Like, this is crazy. How is nobody like gawking at this, right?
Well, and that's funny again, as someone who hasn't traveled, I had no idea there was a highway right beside the Colosseum because all you ever see from pictures is the Colosseum they want you to see.
And this beautiful gold and, and that's it, right? I've seen, they have these photos of Cairo and the pyramids. And they always shoot them when the person has their back to the city. So it like looks at the desert. But if you ever shoot them from the other side, you realize that the pyramids are like right on the edge of the city. Right. So it's just kind of funny, those little tricks of the photography.
Well, and my partner, Alex, she's actually traveled quite a bit as well. And she taught in Korea and lived abroad for a couple years. She actually had a great question as someone who's traveled, and she wanted to know what your answer would be.
Oh, nice.
What is an unexpected experience that you had while traveling that sticks out most to you?
Oh, man. Okay. There's so many, but I think there's 2 I'll tell you about.
Please do.
One of them is when you are on the road. People are so generous. You wouldn't even believe it. I was in northern France. I was in Normandy. I had been traveling forever. You're tired and you're dirty and you just want to get to the hostel and you just want to check in. And I get to the hospital that's not open for 4 more hours. And like, I think I could just feel like everything just hit me, the fatigue and everything. And then all of a sudden, right around the corner comes this like happy British couple, and they have their RV here at the local RV park. And they say, oh, you guys, the office isn't open until 3. And I think they just took one look at us and they were just like, oh, these guys need our help. Say, come to our RV with us, bring your bags. And just like a little old British couple, they call them pensioners in England, I think. And they brought us to the RV and they had a little setup outside and they just made us grilled cheese sandwich after grilled cheese sandwich. And they call them toasties in England. And I just remember like the lady kept saying, oh, my son, he travels and I know what it's like. And I used to travel myself and blah, blah, blah. And we just sat with these people for like 4 hours, just like chatting. And I never, ever forget how generous people are to you when you're on the road, place to stay, need to do some clothes, wash your clothes, no problem. We met this guy in Istanbul. His name is Kieran. Kieran was so generous. The Turkish people, on a side note, are the most generous people you will ever meet in your entire life. I used to think Canadians were generous. Not even close. Not even close.
Really?
Like this guy Guin, I met him at the Istanbul hostel. We just chatted. He was so happy. People are so happy to meet travelers, you know? And he says, oh, you know, I'm from Ankara, the capital. If you're going through, just look me up and come stay with me. And like, I've met this guy for like 6 hours, right? Like he's just extending his home to me. So sure enough, I'm going through the capital. I look him up and he comes and he meets us with his car at the train station. And we go right to his house and he's got a dinner. Oh, my mom sent this food over, blah, 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 this nice dinner. And then he says, oh, by the way, tomorrow I actually have to go to Istanbul for business for a couple of days. So here's my keys. And this guy left us in his apartment for 2 days, used the space, whatever. We could have been robbers.
Complete strangers. Here's the keys.
Just that level of generosity is just like insane. And the second story I was going to tell you, I know this is now 3 because I kind of forgot about it.
Oh, that's fine because these are exactly the kind of thing I was hoping to hear.
Boom,
just
boom,
unexpected.
boom.
Yeah.
One of my favorite traveling stories is I was in Turkey. I was in Cappadocia, which is the Turkish desert. Picture planet Tatooine. That's like what you're working with here. They actually filmed Star Wars in Cappadocia.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, there you go. And I had met this guy who in Istanbul, who was a carpet salesman. And he was such a cool guy, Hussein, very friendly, just like every other Turkish person you meet, extremely generous. And he was like, oh, you guys are going to be in Cappadocia in a week. I'll be there too. Like, let's party one night together. Right. So I'm like, oh, that's great. So Hussein comes and picks us up. And this was awesome because we got to go to all these places with this local that like we as tourists wouldn't have the balls to go, wouldn't know to go, wouldn't be able to communicate, whatever. And the really cool thing that happened was that night we had gone to what is basically like the Turkish Lions Club. Okay, gentlemen's hall, nothing ridiculous. Everyone's just having chai and playing dominoes and backgammon and just chilling, but no women, right? I'm the only girl there. And my traveling partner, who was my boyfriend at the time, he had recently, in our trip to Italy, acquired for free this really nice lambskin coat. Okay, and he was wearing this nice big fur coat because in the Turkish desert it gets pretty cold at night. And he's wearing this nice fur coat. And at the hall, one of the guys says to him, just one random guy, and Hussein translates for us. He says, oh, I like that coat. You should sell it to me. And Ryan's joking with him. And he says, oh, you know, you should trade me a carpet for it. And the guy says, yeah, no problem. I'm a carpet salesman. Here's my card. Come to my shop tomorrow. And I think he was like a little bit like, oh, shit, because he kind of wanted to keep the coat. Fast forward the next day, we trade this fur coat for this beautiful silk on silk Turkish carpet. And the guy loved it because he was like, you know, in Turkey in the old days, that's what you would do. You would just trade, right? And now this guy is walking around the Turkish desert with this beautiful Italian lambskin fur coat, right? And all he had to do was trade a carpet for it.
That's awesome. That's so fun.
It was sick. It was so sweet. And then Hussein, he took us to his buddy's house. And in Cappadocia, everyone lives in caves. Oh. Right? Because the rock is very, like everything's powered. There's hydro and stuff, but
yeah.
It's caves. Like rock is so soft. I shouldn't say everyone, but like a lot of homes are in these soft rock caves. And so we go and visit Hussein's friend out in the middle of the desert. He drives up to this like cave and we're all inside. There's a couple of dudes there. Everyone's drinking chai. We're smoking these hash doobies. One guy busts out this like little Turkish like guitar. And I remember just kind of like looking around and I was just thinking like, okay, I made it. Like I'm in the middle of nowhere in Turkey, thousands of miles from my home, thousands of miles from any scenario I would ever naturally find myself in back home. This is cool as hell. That's kind of one of my favorite traveling stories because I'm like, that happened? Like that wasn't a story. No, it was a memory.
Now you're a bit more outgoing than the average person, I'm going to go on a limb to say, but what advice do you have for new travelers, especially traveling alone? Not everyone might be as, you know, brave enough, let's say, to take the keys off of a stranger. And I mean, that's the situations you just described are very unique. What advice would you give to someone like me if I wanted to plan a trip, you know, when the world gets back to such a time? But if I wanted to plan a trip alone, what's your advice to me? What steps should I take? What planning should go into it?
No, that's a really good question. And like so much of my trips are organized in advance. I meet a lot of people who are like, fuck it. They just bought the plane ticket and they got the passport and their credit card and they'll figure it out. I personally have too much anxiety for that kind of travel, right? I am the type of person that has it all printed out, my transfers, what time I'm getting there, backup copies of my passport and my credit card tucked away in a special spot. Like I'm a very paranoid traveler. And I think I've gotten less so in my old age because I really realized like there's really not that much to worry about if you're fucking smart. Don't walk down a dark alleyway at night. I also think some of the advice I have been given as a traveler makes sense, but don't let yourself be afraid all the time. They say you should never take a drink from a stranger. Well, the reason why is they could drug you and then take all your shit, right? Well, I have never in all my years of traveling felt like a sketchy situation like that. And people are going to offer you a cup of tea all the time. If you met someone traveling, you said, oh, come back to my place. Oh, we want a cup of tea. And then if that person was like, well, you're going to rob me? You'd be like, this is weird, right? Like, why? Like, don't be afraid of other people. I get it that when you're in another country, essentially you have no rights, right? You are not a citizen of that land and you have to be really, really respectful of that. And I think a lot of the reasons why Americans get a bad rep when they travel is because I know some really great Americans, but sometimes when you get a whole group of them, right, that there can sometimes be a lot of America and not a lot of the country you're in, right? And I think Canadians are guilty for that too. I think a lot of cultures are guilty for that. I mean, right? But I have definitely traveled with a lot of Americans who said they've been treated badly. And I think that really sucks. No one should be treated badly because of where they're from. That doesn't make any sense, But I think Canadians are very well received on the traveling market. And to get back to the advice I would give you, if you are worried about traveling, it's just because you have concerns about the logistics of things for the most part. When I get to the airport, what am I going to do? How am I getting from the airport to the hotel? If something goes wrong, it's just you. There's no friend that you can be like, hey, what are we going to do about it? Like, you got to figure it out. You grow up a whole lot when you travel by yourself. And my first advice is pick an easy destination. I went to Newfoundland by myself. Nothing's going to happen to me in Newfoundland. You're going to be fine. If anything, you're going to have a great time.
Worst that's going to happen out there is you're going to drink too much Screech.
Oh my God, I did get Screeched in. I am now an honorary Newfoundlander. But yeah, pick an easy spot, right? Traveling doesn't have to be this huge endeavor. You can go to Ottawa by yourself for the weekend. Go and try a few restaurants. Start small and then go big. My first ever solo trip was Iceland. My most recent solo trip was Thailand. Iceland is literally the safest country in the entire world. And I was quite nervous about traveling by myself.
Sorry to cut you off. It's statistically the safest country in the world?
Absolutely. Like, I didn't even lock the car door. Like,
Awesome. Yeah.
So safe. And I was kind of really nervous about traveling by myself as a woman. Women have different rights in different countries, and not everywhere is as equal to their women as we are in Canada. And I don't even mean that with regards to rights. I mean also societal perceptions of how a woman should be. Mm-hmm. There's some places that I've traveled in the world, they're not really cool with you wearing a tank top. You can totally wear a tank top here, no one's going to care, but you're there. So you got to respect that. So I was a little bit worried about traveling as a woman by myself. And I think there's some places where you still have to be. There's some places I probably still wouldn't go by myself.
Right.
But I would go with my brothers, my boyfriend, whoever, I think that's one thing as dudes, you're really lucky because you don't have to have that same kind of threat to your personal security, I think, is sometimes women have to worry about when they travel. Mm-hmm. But my biggest thing is you will be so proud of yourself when you do your first trip. I kept a journal. I sometimes read my journal from my trip in Iceland. And I'm by myself and it rains a lot in Iceland and I'm cold and I was camping and I was miserable and wet and hungry. And I literally am writing in my journal, why did I do this? This is the worst idea I've ever had. Like, just being so dramatic, right? Yeah. And now I look back, what was the problem? Like, you were totally free. You could do whatever you want. You didn't have to check with anybody. You can eat at this restaurant. You can go to this museum. You want to have a nap? Great. No one, like, you are in complete control of the itinerary. And that's very liberating.
That's really awesome. Now, a couple more questions for you here as we're
too.
wrapping up. What is the place you've traveled that you'd be most likely to move if you had the option?
Ooh, that's tough. It sounds kind of like cheesy, but I would really like to move to Newfoundland someday. Newfoundland is awesome. But if we're talking about international places,
No, just anywhere.
I always thought living in France would be awesome.
Right.
In France, they obviously had a revolution. You know, and that's still a big part of French culture. Liberté, égalité, fraternité, you know, liberty, equality, brotherhood. Like, you see that posted all over the place. There's statues, there's monuments. People aren't afraid of the government there. The government's afraid of the people. The people are more in control. They're not afraid to just start a fucking riot if they're pissed off.
Right.
And I think that would be really cool to have my descendants grow up with that attitude. I think Canadians, we don't really like to rock the boat. And we kind of just rather if everyone just got along and things just went smoothly. Yeah. And sometimes that means we yield.
Very true. Yeah.
Right. And I think that the French just have a really kick-ass attitude about standing up for themselves. And unfortunately, it comes from a history of needing to. But I would love to live in France. And like, that would be the reason why.
And I guess last one for you here today, is there a place that you have wanted to visit, but you haven't got a chance yet? Or do you just have places that, you know, it's all just kind of general?
No, there's definitely places I'd really like to travel, places that are on lots of other people's lists, but I'm like, yeah, I don't really see the appeal to me. But the two places I'd love to go to Africa.
Really?
I've never been to Africa. I would love to see like giraffes and elephants and like lions, like in their habitat.
Right,
I think that would be so cool. But my like dream trip is to go to Russia.
Cool.
I want to go to Russia really badly. I'm a big history nerd. I love like old stories and museums and all of that stuff. And Russia has such a rich history. And I always thought Russia would be an amazing place to do your honeymoon.
Really?
Get a little cabin in the train, do the Trans-Siberian.
Oh, cool.
Check the whole country. I always thought that would be really, really sweet.
That would be very beautiful.
Totally. Yeah. And Russia's so big, like you would see so much land and with only just like in Canada, like just staying in the one country, right?
Well, Maggie, thank you so much for being on the show today. I'm glad I changed the initial interview to become what it was. I had a great time chatting with you, and I hope to have you again on shortly.
Oh my gosh, I would love that. Thank you so much for having me. I feel like I just rambled. I'm going to watch this later and it's going to be hilarious. But I do want to leave your listeners with one piece of advice with regards to travel.
Please do.
And well, maybe two pieces of advice. The first one is a funny story. When I was in Thailand, I lost my Swiss Army knife, my pocket knife, just to a mix up of like a carry-on versus checked luggage thing. I forgot it was in there. Right. I was so upset. I called my brother Casey. I said, I lost this Swiss Army knife he gave me. I'm so upset. He goes, is that the worst thing that happened to you on your 3-week trip to Thailand? I thought about it. I thought, yeah. I was, well, then you're okay. And I realized, okay, I'm being dramatic. You're going to lose shit when you travel. It's not a big deal. It's not you. You know, that's the most important thing. The other thing that's a piggybacking on that, get travel medical insurance. That if you leave the country without that, you are foolish, okay? Get travel medical insurance. I'm a person who's been injured 2 times abroad, okay? I broke one arm in Ireland. I broke one ankle when I was in the Canary Islands. I didn't pay a dime, not a fucking dime.
Well, and I'm glad you said that because that's something I didn't even know that was a thing, you know what I mean? So again, as a non-traveler, that's amazing to know.
You must, dude. I don't even go to the Caribbean for 7 days without travel insurance. You never know when a drunk driver could hit you or something, right? You never know.
True.
Travel medical insurance. The other thing, and I will leave you with this, when you're packing for your trip, you got to lay out all your stuff that you're going to put in your bag, everything that's going to go in your bag. And then you're going to take half the clothes and twice the money. And I will leave you with that. Thank you so much for having me. This was an honor. It was a pleasure.
Thank you,
it's my
Maggie.
first Zoom, not my last.